The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler. April 1st, St. Ludovico Pavoni. Luigi Pavoni was one of the predecessors of St. John Bosco in the education and care of orphaned and abandoned children. He was born in Brescia, Lombardy, in 1784. His parents were Alexander Pavoni and Lelia Pontecarli, descendants of noble families with sufficient wealth to maintain their position. Luigi was of a serious character from childhood, his sister Paulina stated. Luigi was from childhood very devout while I was very naughty. The young man began to discover his vocation during the vacations he spent in Alfanello, where he played with the children of the peasants and taught them catechism. On one occasion he threw his shirt from the window to a beggar who was shivering in the street. Louis had an aptitude for the fine arts and probably would have made a good painter or architect, but it was no surprise that he decided to study for the priesthood. Since the revolution had wiped out all the seminaries, the young man had to study under the direction of the Dominicans until he was ordained a priest in 1807. Pavoni did not have a permanent position, but helped in various parishes in Brescia, particularly in the oratories founded by Father Manelli and some others. In this kind of work he showed extraordinary ability. In 1818, when he was only 34 years old, he was appointed canon of the Cathedral of Brescia and parish priest of St. Barnabas. Next to the church there was an old Augustinian convent, one section of which housed the parish priest, while the rest served as a military storehouse. The new parish priest conceived the project of transforming the building into a permanent oratory, that is, an institute that would house abandoned children in a family atmosphere and prepare them for life. Pavoni consulted the crucifix and had the impression that Christ was encouraging him to undertake the project. The bishop, Bishop Nava, promised him his support, and Father Pavoni inaugurated his oratory in a corner of the old monastery, called the Rat's Nest. The first job he chose for his boys was that of a printer. The next 20 years of the Blessed's life were a web of notable successes and difficult negotiations with the authorities to obtain permission to print and to use the entire monastery for the orphanage. At that time, Lombardy was still dependent on Austria. The French Revolution and Napoleon were still exerting their influence, and the voice of the late Joseph II of Austria, our brother the sacristan, was still being heard. As the desire for independence was already agitating the people, the authorities viewed the founding of an Italian printing press with great suspicion. As for the question of the monastery, although the Austrian governor admired Father Pavoni, he was too much of a Josephinist to return to the church a property that the state had taken from him. Moreover, the difficulties inherent in any bureaucracy were even greater in Lombardy. In 1823, Father Pavoni was granted a license to print, although the printing press was already in operation before that, but permission to occupy the entire monastery was not granted until 1841. With the help of his generous benefactors, among whom were Bishop Nava and the Blessed Sister Paulina Trivellini, he was finally able to set up a trade, drawing and music school. Naturally, there was no lack of financial difficulties. In 1832, the work of the printing press of the Oratory was distinguished at the Exhibition of Brescia, and the following year, Pope Gregory XVI praised the foundation as cosa buona, a good thing. But in 1836, the foundation had to face the effects of cholera, which left hundreds of orphaned children in Brescia. Among the nurses who distinguished themselves most during the epidemic was Paula di Rosa, foundress of the Handmaids of Charity, December 15th, who suggested to Bishop Pinzoni that he organize a school for deaf and dumb children. This school was entrusted to Father Pavoni. On the other hand, the civil governor asked him to take charge of the Orphanage of Mercy. The generous conduct of the Blessed finally succeeded in getting the city council to give him the San Bernabe building. Luis Pavoni was a man of medium height, robust and with silky hair. He had a fiery and impulsive temperament and spoke with ease and authority. The patience and serenity he had acquired by dint of self-control produced an impression of repressed energy. He was a rather cultured man of varied and balanced interests. He was not superficial, but neither could he be said to be a sage. His ideal of education, very open, consisted in training every man so that he could be really good. It should be noted that 50 years before the publication of Rerum Novarum, the Blessed understood the religious significance of social justice and put it into practice with his employees. Although many of his boys were literally the refuse of society, Father Pavoni was determined to make of them good men, good workers, good citizens, and good Christians. His pedagogical methods, like those of St. John Bosco, consisted rather in preventing and encouraging than in repressing. The Blessed preferred kindness to severity. Rigorism, he said, leads no one to heaven. However, there will undoubtedly be those who still find Father Pavoni's methods too severe, forgetting that the human material he had to educate was not exactly easy. Pavoni wanted the oratory to have the atmosphere of a family and not of an institution. It is enough to read a little about his way of treating the children to be convinced that he was a saint who loved the children with all his heart and whom they repaid with the same coin. Father Pavoni mercilessly expelled the bad elements to prevent them from corrupting the good ones, but instead of abandoning them to their fate, he continued to watch over them outside the oratory. It is true that the choice of the Treatise on Perfection of Father Rodriguez as a book of spiritual reading for the children was not the most correct, but there were, on the other hand, some magnificent things. For example, the Blessed considered the kitchen so important that the cook and his assistants were under the immediate supervision of the director, who demanded good food, punctuality, and good manners with the children. Wine was not forbidden, it simply had to be drunk with discretion. One of the forms of recreation that the Blessed recommended to his boys was the performance of comedies. The latter meant attracting the criticisms of the well-intentioned society of the time, and not even the presence of the bishop, the seminarians, and the students of the Jesuit school in the first theatrical representation of the oratory managed to silence them completely. For many years the Blessed had long cherished the project of founding a religious congregation to continue his work. Little by little he had drawn up the rules and constitutions of a congregation of priests and lay brothers who were to work in their respective offices. After much thought and prayer, he consulted the matter with Bishop Nava and Cardinal Angelo Mai, who encouraged him to carry out his plans. Pavoni to get down to work, despite the criticism of those who considered it unworthy of a religious to teach arts and crafts, although they found it quite normal for him to teach science and literature. Saint Teresa was not without reason when she asked God to protect her from pious fools. The Blessed bought a property for the novitiate in Sayano, near Brescia. He restored the old buildings. He established an agricultural colony and transferred there the school for the deaf and dumb. In 1844, he obtained permission from the Holy See to receive novices. But for this, he also needed the permission of the Austrian civil authorities. So it was still 3 years before the Congregation of the Sons of Mary Immaculate was formally founded. On December 8, 1847, Louis Pavoni, who had previously been appointed Superior General, made his religious profession. The day before, he had renounced his canonry and transferred to the new congregation the titles of his house in Brescia, his personal property, and the buildings of St. Barnabas and Sayano. No doubt that, along with the cross of canon, he also renounced the decoration of Knight of the Bronze Crown that had been conferred on him in 1844 by Emperor Ferdinand I. On that occasion, the Blessed had privately remarked, "Why didn't the Emperor send me a sack of flour for my boys' food instead of this medal?" Shortly after the congregation was founded, the rebellion of the Lombards against Austria broke out. The situation became more distressing from day to day. In January 1849, the government imposed a heavy fine on the city of Brescia. Tempers became so inflamed that the Blessed judged it prudent to close his beloved printing press. The storm broke out on March 26th with what was called the Decade of Brescia. The next day the Blessed left with all his boys for Sayano under a stormy rain. When he passed Torreselle, his sister Paulina wanted to lend him a carriage, but the old man refused, saying, "No, I can go on foot like my boys." Finally, the caravan arrived at its destination, exhausted and drenched. The Blessed still climbed to the top of the hill to see Brescia and the oratory in which he had spent 30 years of his life burning. At that moment, he had his first cardiac spasm, which was to take him to the grave in a few days. The parish priest of St. Mary's sent him immediately to bed, and Father Pavoni obeyed. It was the first time he had gone to bed in linen sheets since he had left his father's house. Gradually, he grew weaker and weaker. He died a week later, at the age of 66, amid the tears of his brothers and his children. It was Palm Sunday, April 1849. The day before, The Blessed had heard all day and all night the roar of the cannons bombarding the city of Brescia. Pavoni was buried in Sayano. His body was later transferred to Brescia, where it now rests in the Church of the Immaculate Conception. The cause of beatification was introduced in 1919. 28 years later, in 1947, Luigi Pavoni was solemnly beatified.